back to Working Class Revolt. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dust James of Anti-Imperialist America, and I'm just trying to show we are tired. I am tired tonight, a little bit late. So I have with me my great co-host, friend, and comrade, long-time labor organizer, Boilermaker by trade, David Fox, with us
Good
tonight.
afternoon.
Well, it's evening here, and in the U.S. is an international working class solidarity. We're coming to you live via YouTube. We were unable to go live on Facebook last minute; wasn't working. So if anybody, once we get a few people on YouTube, people want to share it to the Facebook, that help. So we're going to get right into it. There have been a lot of memes, and there's been a Twitter battle going on between members in China, high profile figures in China and Australia. And a lot of Chinese folks are tired of being constantly having to deal with the racism when they talk with Westerners. They're constantly having stereotypes thrown against them, all wide Western forces are waging these endless, disgusting, genocide, illegal wars, and people in China are tired of it. I'm going to throw up a meme that was created, hide myself, and let my comrade from Australia talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, obviously the first one you've seen here with the Australian soldier with a knife to a young boy's throat, or holding his lamb, representing the war crimes that were committed in Afghanistan by our service personnel. Obviously, that's taken off. Both the federal parliament, or our Commonwealth Parliament, both political parties, the Liberal National government and the Labor opposition, both condemned such actions, which wasn't surprising because I understand both those parties are parties of imperialism, and obviously denunciating what that was put through to the media during the week. But what's interesting, there's been two other memes after that as well, drafted by the same, I believe, editor or artist. What's interesting is the whole notion from Western countries condemning China, and it's this attitude, this spiritual colonisation of how Chinese should behave. When you hear about Australian democratic values or Western liberal values, that's something that's been around with us the last few hundred years, ever since the rise of the British Empire and other empires in Europe, and no doubt US imperialism in the 20th century, right up to the very moment. It's there to basically look at other peoples, demonise them, make them subjected to ridicule, that they're not quite right to be up the level of we are. It's deliberate there to look at other people, other nationalities as second-class citizens. And this whole notion that was with this whole war of words between these memes, about these memes, is also a deliberate, very deliberate diversion from all the major political parties in the Australian Parliament, their complicity of what happened, because a lot of these war crimes committed when Labor was in government, and not only just the Liberal National Coalition, and they're trying to deliberately divert that away from that attention to actually try and say, no, we're still quite a good place and we're really the good guys of the world, not realising just how complicit and how deep this runs. So it's not just the soldiers on the ground and not just the commanding officers, but as a whole systematic institution of not just the military, but the system of our system of capitalism, imperialism itself. And they're deliberately trying to divert that attention. Oh, this is nasty. And I find it actually hypocritical when countries such as ourselves and our representatives talk about democracy, Western liberal values, etc., and when they're going and then criticising China on so-called human rights, which are still unfounded. There's no actual proper concrete evidence of such, especially in the Uyghur region, or regarding the Uyghurs. There's been actual systematic proof. It's just been lies told by our mainstream medias, including the ABC and SBS here. It's basically this whole anti-China tirade. Let's whip everyone up that they say China's the bad person in all this, where in fact is China hasn't committed those war crimes. It was our government did. Not just immediate soldiers. Once again, I will emphasise that they'll blame the immediate soldiers, but they will not actually blame the whole system itself. And they knew full well what was going on at the time. But that was the whole. That's the whole idea of this war of words with China, and to antagonise China. It's not the only prerogative, but to demonise China as the bad thing of the world, and then we all got to oppose it, and diverting attention from what this institution of imperialism is all about. Now, the other thing actually on that as well, with the war of words with China, and on various things, just this week they announced actually they're putting massive tariffs on our wine. Now, China is one of our big export markets for Australian wine. And it's not only that, that's on top of the massive tariffs they're putting on wheat, on coal, which now they're looking any type of coking coal moving towards Mongolian and Russia, and various other resources they may and products we do export to China. There's a bit part one at a time is putting more tariffs on, and this trade war, which is escalating which is coming to a crescendo. What also the governments are not admitting, and then what they won't tell, what's underlying all this is also the so-called allies of Australia, not just the US, and there's Canada, Europe, and the UK. They're all patting Australia on the back. Yeah, go for it. Yes, we've got to be shown to be proving that we're of strategic importance to the US. To Washington and the Pentagon especially, but also I believe Wall Street. And once a very infamous, I'll just go back a little bit in history, when in the early 70s, when we had the Whitlam government, Gough Whitlam became the first Labor Prime Minister in many 23 years we had 23 years of continual Conservative rule. One of the first things he committed to was pulling our troops out of Vietnam. Now, when he did that in 1972, now shortly after he was elected in, there was a massive bombing raid by US Air Force on North Vietnam, especially Hanoi. It was really excessive. It was just a blanket carpet bombing. There was no need for it, but that's what they did, and Whitlam condemned it. Well, that infuriated Henry Ford at the time, and there was a taped phone call between, and I've heard this, it's there on YouTube. I can try and hunt that down. Between Kissinger and Henry Ford, and basically getting stuck into Australia, and all they saying, well, they need us more than we need them, and that was the famous words, and that's quite true. And so what both parties of political persuasions are trying to prove that, oh no, you need us as well. We've got to be there at the front fight, and basically what we're doing, what we're going to be losing out economically is all our so-called friends, Europe, UK, they're all patting Australia on the back. Yep, go for it. Yep, China's the evil bad guy and all this. You're doing the right thing. Don't get bullied by China, but bit by bit we're losing the markets. And what these other countries are doing? Oh well, Italy, Spain, France, we're big wine producers along with the UK. There's a market for us. We can move in and just basically take them off Australia. And so is with our wheat. It goes with all these other commodities we do send to China. Well, and obviously they can look elsewhere as well, and that will actually cut everything out completely. So that's just what you're seeing as well. That we've got to look at what's happening on the ground economically, what's primary, what's happening around here, and all this and all these memes are just and all these criticising of these memes are a deliberate attempt to deflect the attention off what's really going on. And I think we've always got, like I've always stated, I make comments this to Caleb Morp and everyone else, focus on what's primary all the time. Yes, a lot of secondary stuff in the face, it's immediate and everyone goes right off on a tangent, but that's the problem. Everyone goes off on a tangent on, let's get back to what's happening here on the ground and all the movement of forces that's happening in between here. And so that's just why there's a two-pronged approach. It's not only Australia's trying to cover up or deflect the attention about war crimes in Afghanistan, but also this has been also cheered on by the other world powers, other world economies, Western, well, not just the US, but British, European. They're trying to actually do this to get it on in such a way because they want to deflect the attention away that they're going to move in on the markets instead. And that's what we're seeing here right now. And obviously, well, some of the big name brand name winemakers here, they're going to be in a lot of trouble because all of a sudden we've just lost the market. It happened also too. It's not the first time this has happened either. Back when John Howard was our Prime Minister, and he committed troops to Iraq along with Tony Blair and George W. Bush. What was not explained, and a lot of us knew about this, that Iraq was one of our biggest exporters of wheat and barley. We used to send a lot of that to Iraq. After Iraq was systematically destroyed and population massacred in that, funny enough, we lost all that market. And guess what was replaced with? Other countries exporting their wheat and the grains to their Iraq. Our farmers lost out, so they had to find new markets to look for it. Now, I've seen comments on Facebook, social media, and other social media platforms on it, and when they said, "Oh, well, they put all these tariffs. We're going to have all this beef, all this lamb and beef." And that was one of the other big tariffs they put in. All this seafood, all this wine. It's going to be real cheap now. We're able to afford it. Wrong. Guess what's going to happen to it? It's going to be destroyed. And it's not the first time it's happened. And actually, just going on about the wine industry, I won't name the major company here, but they've got one of the oldest wineries in Mildura, which is 4.5 hours northwest of Bendigo, and fruit growing region of Victoria in the Mallee district. What happened? Many years ago, there was a fire because it's an old winery, and there was a fire because there was all this Oregon timber. And no one knew it was on fire because something happened but burnt inside out. Don't ask me how it started. Well, obviously that damaged a lot of equipment there. But what do they do with the wine? And it was also one of the prime bottling points for a lot of bourbon, such as Jack Daniels and Jim Beam, etc. It was imported there, and they bottled it there. What do? They put it all on trucks, escorted by federal and state police to a location just out of Mildura, and there was a big hole in the ground, and this was bottled wine and bottled goods and that, and they just dumped it all in there and buried it, and they had security around it as such. That's what happened to it. So if anyone's going, "Oh, we'll be able to afford cheap wine," it even goes with our export meat and beef products, lamb products. What happens? A lot of it's our best meat and export to both, and it's not just China. We export it around to other countries around the world. When they're saying, "Oh, well, now we're going to have all this cheap, really good quality meat," wrong again. That'll just be destroyed. It won't be there to say, "Okay, well, there's no logic under capitalism except for the capitalists." What they will look at, well, instead of actually selling this meat on, let's not waste this. Let's sell it on in the Australian market. And build up a strong domestic economy, because Australia really will enable people to be able to afford it. They won't do that. They'll destroy that. And now they're looking about our grains, such as wheat and barley. Now, obviously, what they've come about, well, let's just feed to those countries that need stock feed instead of producing it for extra food. They won't, or even save it for a rainy day, which grain you can store it for a long time under particular. If you do it correctly the first time, you can do it, the grain can last for quite some time. But unfortunately, we won't see that. It'll be either sold for stock feed, and if they can't sell it, they'll destroy that as well. So always take into account, when you hear about a country such as China, there can be any other country as well, we're going to put tariffs on your goods, we're going to stop importing your stuff, and everyone goes, "Woo, we've got all this we've got this extra supply stuff, we are able to afford it." Wrong again. The capitalists are always seeking profit, and if they can't make profit from it, they'll destroy it. I mean, how many brand new cars are made every year and they can't sell them all? What happens to all those excessive brand new cars? They either get stored somewhere for some time, but they'll be stripped down and all the metal stripped down again, recycled. In new cars, it just gets wasted. But a lot of companies are very multinationals, medium-sized companies, etc. They're notorious at doing this, but just going and burying it somewhere. For example, mining companies, a classic example, they've got brand new equipment and they've got excessive brand new equipment. A lot of them, most of the time, they just dig a big hole, bury it, push it all in with a big bulldozer or whatever. Even even new mining trucks and vehicles and stuff like that. Just push it all into a big hole and bury it. And you won't see it again. So this is the whole. This is capitalism for you, 101. That besides the exploitative nature of it and creating hostilities between groups of people or different nationalities, demonising people who are not from, say, demonising people from other nations, etc., saying they're inferior or they wouldn't know anything about human rights or democracy. And that is a deliberate, and this is what it does. But they do that. But the main thing, if they can't sell their goods when there's an crisis, and which is causing a crisis of overproduction, what do with all those overproduced goods? Destroy it, one way or the other. So that's what we will be seeing here. And not only that, then Australia's national economy suffers, and those capitalists will suffer because it's now a loss of a market and needs to seek new markets elsewhere. And so that really, when coming out this, and I would actually recommend to everyone, if you want to go on the website, the Global Times, look up, and it's a Chinese website, and it's excellent detail how they've come about this and analysed it. And where actually, basically, there's this little meme in the cartoon goes, it shows the kangaroo jumping off the diving board into an empty swimming pool. And you know what happens when you land in an empty swimming pool? You hit hard and it hurts. And this is where we're going as well. While other nations are cheering us on, leading the way, or cheering this government on, not realised. But what's not been said is the sharks are circling. Well, the hawks are circling, the vultures. Well, actually, let's rephrase it. Sharks are good animals, but the vultures are circling now. And they know, well, just killed the Australian market, export market. Now we're moving in and taking it over. And well, where will our so-called friends be after that as well? So we're pretty much then left as complete, not only with egg on the faces, but as an island nation, we'll be geographically sort of cut off economically from the rest of the world. So it's something worthwhile to always keep in mind what's happening here. So these memes has been showing up, and actually I agree with those memes. They're spot on the mark. Instead of trying to cover this up, they're just exposing the reality that we were an aggressive nation, part of the US imperial military bloc. And let's face it, we're up to over our heads in it. Well, our respective governments over the years have been up to over their heads in it. Iraq, Afghanistan, we've got a history of it. Over to you. Sorry about that. We're going too long on there.
All right. Let me switch the cameras back around right quick. Okay. All righty. All right. You should be coming back on, comrade.
Yep.
There we are. Well, we were unable to go live on Facebook. I'm not sure what the technical difficulty was. For the five people watching, if you could share this on Facebook, get this out on the Twitter, get more people here, that'd be great. Big shout out to We Need Critical Thinking. We Need Critical Thinking. Thanks for being here. Get in the comments. Those of you who are also out there, get in the comments. We'll show your comments on the screen. And we'll give you a shout out. Get up in the comments. All right. So we're a little bit of response to that. I think it's really empowering to see Chinese officials calling out the crimes of Australian military war crimes. It's hooked to the U.S. the bloc. I think China has been at its salt from imperialism led by U.S. imperialism for a long time. And they're just starting to get enough power where they can speak up for themselves without fear of some kind of retaliation. They feel like they have enough power. Maybe they see that Australia is weak for some reason. Maybe they don't like the Australian president declaring war on them or what have you. Trump has been doing the same thing. In the United States, the Democrat and the Republican Party are having a competition on who can be against China more. And these conflicts amongst with our countries, the imperialist powers and the anti-imperialist governments do not benefit the working class of our countries. A shot at Shakur, Black Panther. Do not, only a fool lets them tell them who their enemy is. Well, we know who our enemies are, and they're right here. They're right here in our own countries. They refuse to pay us fair wages. They refuse to pay us. They refuse to give us health care. We have less and less rights. We have a low-wage police state that's only getting worse, and we got to fight it right here. We got no beef with the people of China, Iran, or any of these other places they tell us to hate. So on to the next story.
All right.
So in the United States, we had in the midst of the COVID crisis, in the midst of the economic crisis. Quick note: everybody should know that the economic crisis may have started with the COVID, but it was the crisis of overproduction that happened. Trump was not all great and helping the economy out, and then COVID was some kind of conspiracy that went against and destroy his presidency. No, the economy was going to fall because of overproduction. It is capitalism is unstable. Capitalism has the problem of overproduction, and every 7 to 10 years it falls. It was going to fall. Trump giving tax cuts to the rich so they could buy back their stocks only helped further create that bubble that fell with the COVID. So amongst the COVID crisis, amongst the economic crisis, we had an act of rebellion in the United States. Our African American brothers and sisters and largely young working class allies stood up and said, you're no longer going to kill our black brothers and sisters in the street. We had the Black Lives Matter revolts around the country and it spread around the world. We've also recently had the Me Too movement, where women were tired of being sexually assaulted and tired of a culture that allows sexual assault. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think that's great. It's interesting, though, that all these people that Joe Biden sexually assaulted get scraped under the rug when it's convenient for the liberal imperialist establishment. Then it's not okay to support women's rights when you're attacking their imperialist figurehead. So we have a moment of revolts of chains, revolts against racism, revolts against sexism. Now, what is the result of this? Well, there have been some police reforms. There have been major figures that went to jail. And just recently, I wouldn't call it a win, but some of the crumbs they're trying to kick down to us, what they're trying to do to keep us pacified, and that is the Nasdaq pushes diversity rule. Now the Nasdaq, we got Biden there, the rapist, sexual assault artist who's everyone's happy is being reelected. Black Lives Matter was co-opted. Was tried to be co-opted by the Democrats to support, just have an oppressed nation support one of the imperialist party is against the working class interest, is against oppressed national interest. So the Nasdaq is pushing a diversity rule. It's essentially affirmative action for boards of corporate companies, so they can show them, so this public company can be involved in the Nasdaq, which helps them get investors. And now a certain number of board members have to be black or brown or women. And that sounds like progress, big companies, women getting opportunities, people of oppressed nationalities getting more representation in these big boards. But it's not change. This is the pinnacle of identity politics versus revolutionary class and national politics. This is the absolute crush of it. This is the transgender drone pilots. You might have an oppressed person who is demonized by society and not treated as an equal as they should be, and they should fight for that right. But they're put in a position that is literally murdering brothers and sisters overseas. drone pilot, anybody in a drone pilot position. We don't need to be putting, we don't need more diverse drone pilots. We need to end these wars. We don't need women and black and brown executives. We need socialism. We need to end the means of national oppression, of economic repression. So you can have black and brown and women executives exploit the masses of workers, and you know who the masses of workers that are most hardest hit? Women and black and brown workers are the ones being exploited. This is no reason for the masses of poor black and brown and women workers, women who make 75 cents on the dollar. It's not going to change. Having women executives is not going to change that. Having African Americans own 1/500th of the wealth that white people do is not going to change. Black people getting shot by the cops, killed by the cops, lynched in the street is not going to be changed by having black executives. We, the working class, need to fight for fair wages. We need to implement programs that help the masses of people.
Yep.
Any response to that?
Well, that's right, and I think what's happened, the bourgeoisie, the intelligentsia, the academic intelligentsia, which is working on behalf of the bourgeoisie, middle class sections. Talking about, you've mentioned about identity politics here. Versus working class politics, and I think what's really happening here is basically deflect our attention away from our historical struggle to do away with capitalism and replace it with socialism, a system where production is organised around a central plan, where there's so much material abundance that everyone is enriched, not just the very few anymore, that we are able to address certain social issues and social problems. What it's deliberately done by the bourgeoisie here is to keep us divided. So I have to look at someone completely different, as be it regardless of what colour their skin, their particular nationality, or through their gender, whatever. And it's deliberately divided instead of we've all got one thing in common. They are relations to the means of production, what Marx was talking about in the first place. Marx and Engels to include that. So that's what's vitally important. Actually, I have a very good little booklet I'm reading at the moment called Identity Politics and the Transgender Trend. Where is LGBT ideology taking us? And it was written by the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, and any of those comrades are out there listening in or watching this, big shout out to you as well. They do some exceptional stuff, and they had this discussion debate, and what they're saying, what unites us is class, and we can't be divided. Sure, there's certain groups that are got their problems and that, but we can deal with them as a working class man, not as separating them from each other. And it's a typical metaphysical thing to do by the bourgeoisie, is to separate us and separate issues from away from each other as well. Everything's entangled, everything's joined up, everything's interlinked. The underlying problem is the capitalist modes of production itself, the crisis of overproduction, which I was talking, you and I were addressing before, be it from Australia, the China trade dispute, or stoush at the moment, it's otherwise known as, through to what's happening in the US economically. This is what's happening here. And it's deliberately then to divert our attention away from what's really happening, what's on the ground. And I think I like the old saying of the original Communist Party, be it in the US and even say here, and also the current CP, GBML of Britain, when they've actually got the leaflet, black and white unite to fight. And that's what we've got to be back in as one class, united to fight. Because if we want to talk about equal pay or equality in that, well, capitalism isn't an equal system. With their ideals, we should fight and should support and also play some good leadership. But we know at the end of the day, if we want a just world, if they want to put it, or a different type of world, we know it's the social system, or the political economic system of capitalism / imperialism that needs to go. Mm-hmm. And replaced by socialism, obviously. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Right on, right. I just want to renunciate that. Let's see. mean, we got to get all the comrades we can of various political perspectives. We can't let these issues divide us. We can't let and when we're talking with working people, we can't let our contacts harm brothers and sisters, but we can't go out there and immediately force our ideas on people. We have to organize people among their class interests. Um, that said, we should allow the freedom of people to choose what they want to be, and anything that doesn't affect their work should be allowed. Should not be discriminated against in whatsoever. Just quick on that. I know these are touchy issues. Maybe we'll go on to our main topic of today. If everyone can see, the headline is largest labor strike in human history. Our brothers and sisters in India, comrades, farmers. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about this, comrade?
Yes, well, what was this only brought to my attention the last day or two? I wanted to have a look, do some research. Now, what's happening? Well, just currently what's happening at the moment is a massive big strike by farmers, especially from northern India, marching on to New Delhi, the capital. Millions of them, and I'm not just talking hundreds of thousands, there's millions of them, and they're well equipped this time. They've actually well prepared themselves. It's quite a sea of colour, really, with the different type of clothing they wear, and they've been taking on the Modi government, the national government, who wants to sell a lot of farmland to multinationals, which would destroy the Indian farming agricultural industry, because most of India depend on the agricultural and the agricultural products these farmers produce. So they can see right straight away this is like waving a red flag in front of a raging bull. And what's happened now? There's been riots break out, massive sit-ins or sit-downs. For blocking roads. I've only got limited information at the moment. I believe the Indian government will be trying to quash any type of information leaking out to the rest of the world. But I think it's vitally important that this is quite important that these farmers are supported by working class people from all around the world, not just in India. Because the Modi government is really, by rights, a government of the capitalists there in India and abroad. So they allow their interests to be arranged. Now, I've always thought most common working class people would be going, well, why would you want to sell your prime agricultural land to a multinational when it should be back in our hands? Exact same questions these farmers have got as well. And obviously they're seeing the vital importance, but they didn't sit down, or they didn't just go and talk, consistently talking and whinging, complaining about it. They've actually taken matters in their own hands and taking up the fight, which is brilliant. And that's something we can learn from here as well. I come across a lot of people complaining about this, that, and all sorts of things every day. Well, what are we going to do about it? And I think it's really important to learn that, well, if the farmers in India can do this, why can't we take matters in our hands and take up the fight ourselves? No one's going to do the fighting for us. We need to do it ourselves. And it's quite, to me, it's actually quite inspiring and quite powerful. The common farmers, generally they've just been living there farmers have been there for generations and after generations, cultivating land to produce food for their country. Now have been threatened to have that land taken off them by the national government and then owned by the multinationals. You could just imagine them like vultures circling India at the moment. So, yeah, it's actually really good to actually see that. As I said, I've only had limited information. Chino, Latino, 250 million in India on strike. Well, that is impressive. Wow, that is, and how big's the population of India? I think 1.2 billion. That is huge. I'm not too sure who's doing the actual central organisation for these Indian workers. As I said, I've only had limited information myself. Been trying to find out everywhere. If someone actually could put in the comments section any particular links we can look at further, we might be able to make comment later on or in future videos. But I think it's something we can have a look at and learn from these lessons as well. And saying, well, if they're doing it, Why aren't we doing certain things here in our respective countries as well? And it doesn't have to just be around the agriculture. It could be all sorts of major political, economic issues. I understand too, India, it's a long history to that. India was subjugated by the British, predominantly the British Empire. It was once a major producer of cotton cloth. And Manchester, it's otherwise known as, and it's the city. Well, a lot of the cotton mills and that moved to Manchester during the 1800s and 1700s when Britain invaded India. They were quite a lot. They actually were one of the world leaders. India was one stage of the heirloom, so they can make particular cloth. And also many other products that they used to trade on the Silk Road as well, along with China, with them, obviously with a lot of the silk products as well. So what you're seeing here, they were totally disempowered, colonised, disempowered, massacred and that. So they have a long history of struggle fighting against colonial oppression, imperialism. It's nothing new that's happening here as well. But and you've got states such as Kerala, which actually the communists are in government there. Their handling of COVID-19 was above and beyond excellent. They actually that down as one of the best regions in India that handled it. So they've got a very strong communist parties, very strong unions, and obviously when it comes down to a serious fight, they're well organised. And actually, one thing, 250 million people on strike, that is one excellent level of organisation. So my heart goes out to them. I've got my support. Good on you to the farmers of India taking on the system as well. But obviously they need as much support as possible from around the world as well. I think our duty of being internationalist in our outlook. This is part of our duty. What can we do to assist as well? Just on that, I was asked a question by one of the We Need Critical Thinking about political economy. Well, look, understand this.
Let's do that. Let me respond to let's stay on India. I mean, that's the main comment. We'll get on to We Need Critical Thinking question later. Let me respond to the India. Let's stay on the subject of India for a second. Okay. So I'm not sure. I don't know where you got that 250 million number. That's why I didn't show it. From my understanding, I watched Democracy Now! As of Friday. It was tens of thousands of farmers that went on strike, and then solidarity unions with them. It might have grown into 250 million. I mean, hopefully, it's grown. But from my understanding, there was a anti-labor law that the Modi government, a Hindi national government, a government that treated migrants horribly during the COVID when they did the shutdown. Migrant workers who were from one of the most poor rural regions were working in other cities. The country shut down, and these people were left with nothing and no way home, and starving, and they were already living on starvation wages. So this is what the Modi's government is doing to the people in India, and it's for the benefit of the imperialists. If one place is poor, another is rich, it is because that rich power is exploiting that poor power. And these corrupt politicians, these corrupt governments, Modi and the rest of them, are just allowing their countries and being paid to allow their countries to be exploited, and they're part of the exploitation. And you have right-wing figures run. So getting back to the farmers' protest. This has to do with the difference between rural and urban poverty. A lot of the economic growth in India around these call centers and some of the modernization has been taking place in cities, and the rural areas have been left on almost subsistence style farming for decades and decades. India has been in poverty. Rural India has been in poverty for decades. You have Maoist groups fighting each other. You have some Maoist groups doing good things. I know Comrades with the Marxist-Leninists, Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninists have been trying to form peace treaties amongst the different Maoist groups to unite and fight against the capitalist system. And you got comrades within the Communist Party of India who are actually in the government and Kodal and other regions. But this is a long time bursting of the bubble. That the people have had enough. People can't afford enough. There is mass starvation and hunger and the rural Indian countryside. And we need to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters and stand with their movement, be inspired by movement, support any way we can. And any further comments on India?
Well, one thing I had the honour of actually meeting a few comrades from Kerala once many years ago. They came to Australia, and hearing them talk, I think they were members of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. No, there was two of each. There was two from the CPI or CPIM, and then two from the Communist Party of India. And I'll tell you what, they are very switched on. You can ask them pretty much anything about India, and they're quite onto it. They definitely talk. They're quite involved in organising, and they just blew my mind. I think those of us who live in the first world nations such as Australia, New Zealand, or the US, UK, and Canada, and even Europe, I mean, they just leave us to dead just how well-rounded knowledge they are. And some were from poor peasant background or working class background, and a lot of the time in their respective communist parties, that's where they were self-educated. But for readings, actually, one of them told me that's how he learned to properly read and write, was through the party. It wasn't through anywhere, because it was actually a lot of their schools, they didn't have a lot of schools. And a lot of them were prejudiced through the caste system as well. So one was on the very lower strata there, but he was deprived of a real decent education. But where he learned to read and write and have a very scientific outlook was just amazing. My credit to them out there.
Okay, I guess we can move back onto that question. Let me pull that back up. Is this the one you were referring to that you wanted to answer?
Yeah. Political economy. What's saying the difference? Well, let's have a look at understanding this. We live under a capitalist system, basic one. What you have, can you see that? I'll just leave it in front of the camera, stop moving my hand around. There's an economic base which determines your superstructure. And obviously, like the US, we have a capitalist economic base. Out of there, that forms the superstructure. So what do we have in the superstructure? Well, we have parliaments, we have law courts, military, police, and other institutions to uphold capitalist class rule and manage it on behalf of the capitalist class. Remember, the ruling class is the capitalist, and we are the working class. But all that superstructure, all those institutions, including media, education, and I'll mention that too, because a lot of people seem to miss the media, but the media is also part of that as well, that superstructure. It's up there to uphold the capitalist class rule. It's a capitalist system. So all policies in that, regardless of where you live around the world, whatever capitalist country, your governments, irrespective of what they are and irrespective of what party they are, here in Australia, Liberal National Coalition or the Labor Party, US Republican and Democrat, what you'll see here, they will put policies forward to manage the capitalist system on behalf of the capitalist class. We may grab a few crumbs, we may from there, or we may actually have to do a hard fight to achieve a particular aim or a particular policy. But that really, by rights, nothing's given to us because you have a kind-hearted capitalist. Yes, we'll give workers a shorter work week, a high pay, liberal amounts of annual leave and free health system. It doesn't happen that way at all. It happens because of a genuine fight by the working class when it's organised. And that way, that superstructure, when I point it out, then you have problems back down to enforce the economic basis, which is the capitalist modes of production. That's basically what it is. There are, yes, obviously they've got their own national characteristics to it. Obviously, here in Australia, there are certain nominal differences compared to the rest of the world, so such as New Zealand, Canada, US, UK, Europe. But however, the basic principle, the prime kernel, what Marx and Engels was talking about, is still pretty much the same. The principles across the board. So hopefully, I've answered that answered that for you. For we need critical thinking. I love your long name. It's certainly. Hopefully, that's try to clarify that as well.
I think you answered that question better than he was even trying to get you to go to. I think he was he or she. I'm not. It's not gendered here. We need critical thinking. I think he's talking about campaign finance laws, which you answered better than the actual question, because you can. A lot of people in the United States say, if we could only get money out of politics, we could have some say over our government. We could only get money out of politics. Well, as David Fox just explained, you can get all the money out of politics that you want, and as long as the base is the same, the economic base is the same, the superstructure, politics, society, etc., is going to be run by the bourgeoisie, run by the capitalist class. So United States, it's outright corruption. It's legal corruption. You got these PACs, politicians can take money directly from oil companies, pharmaceutical companies. It shows on the record. And when they get down to do the bills, they give these companies tax breaks. It is outright utter corruption. But even if we were to reform our political campaign finance laws, it's just gonna cover up the corruption and make the swindle of a democracy just more efficient until we build workers' power. We're not gonna political campaign finance. I mean, we should push for reforms that are more democratic, but in the end, it's gonna take workers' power to get the needs of the working class. I guess we can. Do you have any other news updates written down?
Well, we can just highlighting a few of the stuff we've talked about: China, what's happening with India. Just what we want to talk to, just add on from last week, we were talking about the regional cooperative economic partnership. I'm further on that because this is going to be, it's turning into a state of affairs down here in Australia that's actually going horribly south, just to put it that way, for those in Australia as well. And obviously working class people will be affected one way or the other. Now, I just saw an article a little while ago, about 2 hours ago, on Facebook on a particular page. Someone drafted up, there was Qantas. Now, Qantas is our national airline carrier. It was privatised many years ago in the Labor government. I believe Paul Keating was the Prime Minister at the time, or if not, he was Federal Treasurer and Bob Hawke was Prime Minister. What happened? Alan Joyce, who's now the CEO of Qantas, announced that 2,000 jobs, maintenance jobs, will now be offshored to China. Well, basically, the Chinese firm is now contracted to do some maintenance. Now, there was this big hoo-ah, and I thought, oh, here we go. People just need to get it to work themselves. And basically, I was just going to say, stop blaming China. So I asked a question. The question was basically around, why hasn't the federal government turned around and nationalised the airline for the public interest or in the public ownership? And everyone's, oh, good question. I wanted to just get it back off because one thing I will say is it's not China's fault for doing this. That was a CEO, Alan Joyce, who made an indefinite decision to do that. And the anger needs to be directed back towards them. And like you correctly pointed out, Dust, we should direct our anger to our own to the bosses here, to the politicians that allowed this to happen and gear it on. The whole political superstructure and economic base needs to be, that's where we need to aim the anger at. And obviously, I would actually put this question to them. What happens to the CEO decide to offshore those jobs to New Zealand, Canada, US, UK, or Europe? What will that level of anger be there? Will it be the same or will it be different? I'm just putting it out there. So that's it certainly is. I understand the underlying issue, which is, hang on, this is our employment security. This is a party of just depriving working class people and a group of workers any type of living and income they need to survive. and I get that as well. But the anger should be directed towards the CEO and towards those policies and those that allow this to happen in the first place. So that's what's happening at the moment. Obviously, I hadn't paid too much attention about the RCEP during the week, but I thought I'd just add that on as well, where we've got to understand these regional, these free trade agreements, what they're, like I asked you last week, which class does it benefit from? In China, they're lifting their people out of poverty. 800 million people out of poverty and more. So I believe the YouTube channel Anti-Conquista did a study on China, which was excellent. And the readings of the recent teachings of Xi Jinping as well, the governance of China, which is I recommend if you can get your hand on all 3 volumes. It's a really interesting read. And I thought, well, we're not, but it's our bosses, the companies here, for example, making these indefinite decisions to move everything offshore. It's the companies here that are attacking workers' rights, along with the politicians. So it's all these, it's our lot here that are actually attacking us workers. Now, I'll do a live chat later on, but there was one bit of federal legislation now about industrial relations. I won't go into the whole complete details. There's some study to do in it, but it's not looking very good for working class people in this country as well. And so this is where we're trying to actually turn that anger back towards our bosses as an old wobbly thing, to the parasite class here. And not well, there's other countries that are trying to generally do something for their population as well. Because one thing, I don't see the Australian government trying to lift its people out of poverty. I don't see the Australian government doing anything about putting a working class agenda forward. I certainly don't see the Australian government, along with the companies, giving us things that we need to, basic everyday things we need to enjoy to live. No, what do? They don't want to go on to the attack and strip us even more of any particular rights. So, also one thing I want to put out there as well with this whole stoush with China, but also Iran and various other countries around the world. Well, I've never had a Chinese person try to rob me, had a person try to invade me, hasn't had a person that threatened me physically. In fact, list a whole lot of name of war crimes, a lot of crimes. There's been not one Chinese person has ever done that. So I'm gonna put it out there. If any workers have come across our videos in the future, ask yourself the question: has an Iranian take a job off you? Has an Iranian put a gun to your head and threatened to kill you if you don't hand over your wallet? Has an Iranian tried to, knock down your neighbourhood, kick you out of your home so he can build a multinational apartment block for some wealthy people? I think, we need to, and I think, comrades, I think we need to actually get that out to everyone else, that we need to divert our anger back onto the real enemy, which is capitalism itself.
Great talk. I just want to address this this comment. I thought it was particularly well written. The fragmentation of communist movement in India corresponds in parts to the complicated division of Indian society in terms of class, geography, and ethnicity. And just try to put your. I would like us to stay out of. Well, India has a caste system. They're horrible. Well, the U.S. has a racial caste system. The British had a racial caste system. Australia had a racial caste system.
Oh yeah.
I mean, these are long-term things. This is every society has a feudal backwards element that has continued into its current society. And Indian culture is no more destructive or backwards than the Western countries. First up, say that right out. I know there was some stuff in the comments. Just wanted to say that. And then you got to look at colonization, what our brothers and sisters in the third world have to go through. The borders of their countries were defined by a foreign power that exploited them for centuries, destroyed their infrastructure, destroyed in India. The British came in, destroyed the looms, made them second-class citizens in their own country, had them fight imperialist wars, and now you get all these people who were put together in a nation drew by colonial borders.
Yep.
exploited, continually exploited. Not the exploitation has not stopped after Gandhi's peaceful independence. They were never economically independent, and there's still a national fight for independence of India. And then along with the fight for socialism, and it is the science and the material conditions that not that we're responding to that create the fight back and go with the fight back. We have to study that. I know there's a lot of good presentation from Indian comrades, anti-colonialist comrades, anti-imperialist comrades in India that can go over that history. But most importantly, do not give in to Western chauvinism. Whenever you hear maybe even comrades or other folks saying something negative about a colonized country, stand up for that colonized country and let them know that the West is not the best. Any response to that?
Well, that's right, and that's what we're alluding to here. I saw the post you put up this morning on Facebook. I shared that. It's interesting how even people on, I'll say, the synthetic left and the ultra left, when they denunciate China, or no, that's not socialism, and then as well, how dare they? Because one, but they know what socialism really is. They've never led a revolution in their first place. And secondly, as well, here they were trying to impose their values on another country, which we've got absolutely no right to do. But why does that say that happens? Remember, there's a few hundred years of history. I watched my mic is muted at the moment, is it? Oh, your mic, okay, thank you. What I was saying is a few hundred years, this came out during the time when Britain decided to expand its navy and start looking at places to colonise around the world, move into new markets. There was this whole Renaissance thinking of making people around the world British. It's where you see places like India, for example, they love cricket. So do we. That's a hangover from that era. Well, it's not a hangover. It's not bad sport. Depends on which part of the world you came from. But that's certainly is to try and make people cast them in a particular type of angle, what they should be, civilised. That's right. When rule Britannia was one of the catchphrases of the British Empire, and about civilising the subcontinents in Africa and etc. Same thing here in Australia as well. It was a superiority that we looked at that a lot of those from Britain identified the Indigenous as not as equal as human beings, but as part of the flora and fauna. Even when Australia federated into a nation in 1901, one of the first policies that was legislated was the White Australia policy. That's right, the White Australia policy. It was there to what they called the Asiatic hordes, and that to protect Australia from the yellow peril. Rule racist. It's in there. Look it up yourself. Just Google White Australia policy. It'd be the whole history about that. And it was there to pit, and you're talking about the caste system. Well, even amongst our society, if you were descended from England, Scotland or Wales, and you happen to be Protestant, aka Church of England or Presbyterian predominantly, you're up there. You happen to be from an Irish Catholic background, you're second. God help you if you're from a mixed background. So, and basically, if you're a mixed background, or if you're a completely different ethnicity, you're discriminated a lot. It'd be if you're from Asia or from another country, different colour, and so on and so on. And especially for Indigenous people that lived in extreme poverty and AKA slavery. Yes, we had it here too. They were enslaved. They were basically rounded up, thrown in chains into jails, onto reservations, etc., used as and paid nothing when they worked, which was a big struggle. And for those of you overseas, Australia only recognised the Indigenous people, First People, as citizens in a 1967 referendum, where the overwhelming yes vote to recognise them as full citizens. But even that, they still had to struggle for land rights, for recognition of their past as well, and still do to this day. They're still probably the most discriminated a lot out of anyone. But back then, when you talk to a lot of them, they identify, well, not identify, but they are Indigenous. But some people say, oh, you're half caste. So you're not exactly them, you're further up, or you might be quarter blood or something. It's just really nasty, terrible stuff to demonize them and dehumanize them even more, that they're saying they're the lesser of us. So yes, we suffer from that from Australia. Why? Because this is what capitalism does. It's there to divide us there in the first place. Okay, no one's born racist. No one's born with any discrimination in them. You're taught to it. Why? Through the systematic superstructure, the institutions of capitalism educated. This is where we stand. I'm saying a worker is a worker, regardless of where they are around the world. Our relations to the means of production are this. We go to work to make a living. We produce stuff, the boss takes it and gives a tiny little back of that portion back quarter wage. And that's your basic plan, capital political economy. But the fact is, what they try and do, they're saying there, well, no, because you're a particular, they're not, okay, you're from a British background, in Protestant, your work is better than someone from Africa. And they were trying to do that to divide us. So we've got to bring that back together. And we've got a huge task ahead of us in our respective countries to getting us back united again, black and white, unite and fight. Because really, how can we be emancipated? How can we be free while other sections of workers are still being discriminated against and being oppressed? Yes? Over you, Dustin.
All right. I recently made a rather controversial meme on my page, Dust James, Anti-Imperialist America. I wanted to show, it kind of goes along with the subject. And what we're promoting on here is working class anti-racism, working class solidarity with oppressed nations. And that is completely different than the bullshit you see, you hear on NPR and you see on MSNBC, where they're trying to get the votes and they're trying to get oppressed people to back their corrupt, oppressive system that's keeping us all down. So we're promoting working class anti-racism, working class solidarity, and an end to the Western chauvinism that thinks that the United States and Europe are somehow better at human rights, or somehow have the better democracies. Or even Marx messed up when he said that he was wrong when he said that socialism was going to come to Europe and America first. He was wrong about that. And Lenin, who understood the system of imperialism, were concentrated monopoly power. And it's become even more monopolized even further than Lenin could have imagined. The absolute power of just a few hundred people and these banking and oil cartels that steal and exploit and keep workers in oppressed nations within the imperialist bloc and the countries around the world, where even places as strong as China and Vietnam have to make horrible deals just to open up to the larger economy. So I'm gonna hide my comrade for a second. He's still with us. I'm gonna show this meme I created. So this actually is part of my upbringing and culture. This is Jeff Foxworthy. I love Jeff Foxworthy. Jeff Foxworthy had this bit of jokes. You might be a redneck. Usually they were working class things, like if you keep your mashed potatoes in a butter dish, you might be a redneck. Stuff like that, or little work. It was usually working class stuff, working class comedy, blue collar comedy. So, and the word redneck comes from the coal miners who had red handkerchiefs, and also it comes from working in the fields, getting sunburned. So I mean, it's working class culture. So I created this meme to spread working class solidarity, working class anti-racism, working class solidarity with the anti-imperialist bloc, the yellow, black, and brown folks standing up against the imperialist system. So if you think Sweden, Norway, Denmark are socialist, but not China, Syria, and Iran, you might be a Western chauvinist. And I read a good article from an Iranian comrade who basically said Iran is socially conservative. And they've been socially conservative for a very, very long time. And it doesn't matter if you had some kind of bourgeois fucking puppet, if you had some kind of puppet like the Shah, a puppet like the Shah didn't help with women's rights. None of that stuff. And you can't go and impose your belief system on another country. But I will tell you what the Islamic Revolution in Iran has accomplished. They went from destitute poverty, from a government that was stealing their resources, stealing their natural resources, the Shah. And it was British Petroleum they did it for, in coordination with the United States. And you got the BBC talking about these countries, how evil they are, how they don't have democracy, they don't have this or that. Well, Iran is leading the way in a planned economy. China is leading the way in a planned economy. And it has been out of the absolute oppression and the need for strength to adopt these superior elements of planning the economy for reason, and they're showing us the way forward. I'm going to put David Fox back on. Maybe he can respond.
Yeah, just one little comment. You might just want to check your typo. Yes, Denmark, you missed the N out of it.
I got you. That's embarrassing.
Are you embarrassed easily? Yeah, so I think it's actually really good. Actually, I know that comedian you're talking about now. I remember him now. Many years ago, I was in New Zealand. I was on the South Island, and I was on this bus, and they actually had him playing. And I love one of the comments, and it says, "Well, if you take photos of mountains, you must be a redneck." I got to admit, I was taking photos of snow-capped mountains, and I think you must be a redneck. I remember that. It was just hilarious because we sometimes had a chuckle about it, and it's good to have a bit of a laugh at ourselves at times. But it's so true, actually, to the term redneck, how it was for many years distorted. And it was actually a term for working class people that exactly right from West Virginia, the coalfields that wore the red bandana or the red handkerchief around their heads, around their necks, and also those like myself who get easily sunburned working outside. So it's quite interesting. But we've on that because that meme was just so true. And like to buy, China's a classic case of example. How many people were saying, "Oh, it's not real socialism at all." And those, especially on the ultra left, are saying it's social imperialist and that, which is a lot of hogwash. But I think they don't understand. Obviously, they don't have a real good understanding about China either. But it's what happens. People who take those positions are actually, in fact, playing into the hands of imperialism. And those attitudes are actually handy tools for imperialism to pit us against these countries as well. I mean, China wants to just develop peacefully and have peaceful relations with the rest of the world. I mean, what's wrong with that? Someone tell me. And they're able to do it. They're able to address it through their system. I think we've also got to understand in our respective countries, what will socialism look like? I think Caleb hit the nail on the head. Well, in the US, it will have American characteristics. Here in Australia, it will have Australian characteristics. And also various other respective countries around the world. I can understand some still look at the Soviet model, and especially in the 30s and 40s, I can understand why communists back then did look to the Soviet Union. Obviously, it was the first time on a large scale that ever happened in their in human history. But we've, and I understand they use that as a model, but is that applicable today? And obviously, well, let's bring it into the 21st century now. We are now in the third decade of the 21st century. What they did over 100 years ago might have worked then, it might not exactly work now. But the principle, the primary kernel, still stays the same. We've got to capture that spirit as well. And I think it's good to see, a country lifting its population out of poverty and developing further and creating so much imperial abundance that no one is poor anymore. And they're able to, and trying to actually have harmony with other countries and helping them to peacefully develop. That's a good thing, isn't it?
Right, we're actually going on past the hour here. I just want to. I've been. We've had a constant commenter that's been raising an important issue, kind of a difficult issue. I want to talk about really quick. I wish we had some women comrades up here to talk about this. And this is from Clara Hernandez. She says, "I'm lucky. My husband's been working for UPS for 26 years. Overtime is what pays the bills. I do understand what you're fighting for." That's a shout out to the union movement. That's pretty cool. But she actually raised raised some important issues earlier that I kind of overglossed because it's such a such sensitive issues. But I'm not ignoring you, comrade. We will address the issue here, and don't feel guilty about staying at home, mom. So basically, what she's trying to talk about is how the movement, the righteous and just feminist movement to give women fighting for equal rights, equal opportunities, was used by the capitalist class in the 70s to lower wages and to push both people to work. So women, sisters, wives, daughters, fellow workers, comrades. Their work in the home has been and continues to be, and men workers continue to be underappreciated. And it's real work done for our society that should be appreciated. Now, in the 1970s, and women haven't had their own money. And women should have their own money. They do work for a society. They should have the money and the economic power, same as the gender, regardless they decide to stay in the home or outside the home. But in the 1970s, they put this out that if you want to be empowered woman, you got to go into the workforce. Women enter the workforce. They were given 75 cents on the dollar or less, pushed into low-paying jobs. And now what has been since 1970, 1970 was a shift for the working class in the United States. The profits of the capitalists kept going up and up and up, and our wages stayed the same. Our buying power stayed the same, and our standard of living has been going down. And part of that was getting women into the workforce, treating them unfairly, paying them less, lowering wages overall. And now, just to make it, you need both parents working. And it was a luxury to have a woman in the house, or a woman or man, someone in the house that was doing that necessary domestic work, and then having whatever provider make enough for an entire household. Not just one. That was a manipulation of a positive movement against the working class, and that's what's happened. They will use everything and anything to lower us. It's a constant class war, and they will use anything and everything against us. Any response to that? I know it's a hard issue, David.
No, that's all right. Actually, regarding about income, and what Carlo actually mentioned about overtime is what pays the bills. It's actually quite a common thing, even here in Australia. The amount of workers that are so dependent on overtime just to make ends meet every week is phenomenal. It's actually what we call excessive hours after a while. Now, overtime in Australia, without getting into technical, it's usually the first 2 or 3 hours of a workday of after your ordinary hours is at paid at time and a half, and then thereafter it's double time. And on public holidays, if you have to work, it's double time and a half. Now what happens? The reason, and it's called a penalty rate. Now, the reason why it's called a penalty rate is to penalise the employer to have you working excessive hours. It was around the fight of the old 8-hour day, and now we have a 38-hour week. It's been in place. Next year will be 40 years of the anniversary of the 38-hour week. And what actually Carl has raised a very important issue here as well is the excessive hours workers have to do to make ends meet. Like yourself, Dust, you work excessive hours. I mean, I do, although I don't get any extra. Even though my pay is around at the base of 38-hour week, I do a lot more than 38 hours every week. I don't get any more for it. And there's a lot of people who work unpaid overtime either as well. Now, I mean, I don't mind doing those hours because I'm in a passion I love the union. That's what I'm passionate about. But I'm just giving you an example. It's like a lot of people out there are working a lot of excessive hours, just trying to make ends meet. And the thing is, at the end of the day, what we're seeing is, in fact, is the value of your wages going down. So you're less able to afford what out of ordinary hours. So, for example, in the US, you do a 48-hour week. I'm sorry, a 40-hour week, 8-hour day. I think that's still in legislation there. All right, but that 40-hour week now, maybe 30, 40 years ago, you were able to purchase a lot more goods, a lot more was produced for your consumption than what you can now. Now you probably have to do 60 hours, 80 hours a week in order to buy what you could back in, say, 1980, for example, if you get my drift. So 40 years ago, 40-hour week, yep, and what you paid then was the value of that was much greater than what you are now. You have to work all those excessive hours with that extra money just to buy the same thing as you would. So if you want to buy a bag of apples, whatever the price was back then in 1980 with X amount of money, well, you now need to have extra money now to buy that same bag of apples. So this is what they do. They try to devalue our wages even more. How they do it? But as I said to you once again, it's basically political economy stuff. Let's make A plus B equals C. A represents all the material that are required, like the factories, etc., to make the goods. B represents the cost of your labour, equals C, which is the price of the commodity. Now we'll put 100 plus 100 equals 200. So that was 100. It was the cost of your material, all the materials, the factories, the plant, etc. For making the good. B, which is your labour, 100 to make the product. Then we'll see with 200. Where does the capitalist want to create the profit? From B. So he'll take 50, and he'll give you 50, right? So everything else didn't change. He still has to pay that 100 out of there to A, the costs of running it, all that, and including buying the materials. But he gives 50 to you, and 50 and take 50 for himself. Next year he'll take 75 and give you 25. Now you're trying to aim to increase that, even trying to use that to pay extra to buy what's produced. But let's say, for example, they also cleverly do is try to inflate the price of that further, so to extract their profit, because they know full well they can't reduce you down to zero. That would be pointless. You don't work for free. You actually work for a wage so you can make a living. So what they do is deliberately inflate it. There was a good little booklet the original Communist Party of Australia put out years ago about inflation and how that's created. Everyone said, oh, high wages increase the prices. No, it's deliberate inflation because the capitalists, what does capitalists do? Seek further and further profit. So they deliberately inflate it. A fictitious capital, if you could put it that way, and increase that further. So if he still needs to maintain you to pay, even if it was still taking 50 off you and 50 for himself, what's he do there with the 200? We'll deliberately increase it to 300, so he gets further. But the problem is, in 1980 you were earning 50, now you're earning 50. This could be up now. He might have inflated it further to increase his profit, 400. But how the hell are you supposed to afford to live? You know what I mean? So that's why I use, say, for example, a bag of apples. To buy years ago, to buy those apples where you need a lot more now to buy. So I hope I tried to explain that a lot easier and understand it. I think I'll look at references too. Caleb does some of the stuff on political economy. I know Richard Wolff does as well, and a few others on YouTube. But basically, this is what's happening around the world. When you hear about, oh, well, if you raise your wages, if you decide to go for a wage claim, say for example, 5% per annum for 3 years or a 3-year contract or 3-year agreement, and that's a lot. But the fact is, when they say, well, this will affect our price margin, what the fact is affecting their profit. But what they deliberately do is is to inflate the price of the commodity even further, so that it'll still keep you out of reach to fully accomplishing what you actually produce. So it's something worthwhile. I was having a look at the little old booklet on inflation, and it needs to be updated, obviously, in a few things, but it's a very interesting understand what that's all about. So, look, Carlo, I understand that. It's quite common right across the bill just to pay your bills, and you from your utilities, your electricity, your gas, water bills, through to your car registration every year, just to keep going. That is a very big problem. But why does it happen? It's because of the capitalists ever increasing, seeking further and further profit.
Good explanation. It's good to break it down for folks. We are labor is what builds all of the society. And it is labor value that's put into stuff when it's sold. That is the thing. The only way they can make a bigger profit is to lower our wages or to speed us up or all this bullshit. It's all these games. And the only way to counteract it, the only way to do something about it is class struggle. Is to fight for workers' power, to build that power and demand our fair share, and eventually demand a better society where we eliminate them and we control our own destiny. Let's see. We're already 80 minutes in. We're actually we got it. We actually got quite a few live viewers, which is very positive. If people want to continue, looks like 18 right now. If people want to continue and get in the comments, it's all YouTube too. I was unable to go on Facebook. We usually have a bigger crowd, but it's all YouTube. Anybody on YouTube want to get a comment or a question before we end it? I know I didn't ask you before. I know I put you on the spot. Did you prepare any right-wing talking points for me?
Oh no, actually, that's
okay.
Thinking of at the time. Yeah. Well, okay. Actually, I just off the top of my point, and that. Well, I'll ask you this question. Well, you're saying don't blame China. Well, why is China taking our jobs?
All right. Okay. Say it again. Okay.
When you
don't blame. Okay. Go ahead.
When you stipulated don't blame China, well, then why is China taking our jobs?
China's not taking our jobs. Okay. The reason why our jobs are being shifted overseas is because our capitalist government, capitalist politicians are allowing these corporations to move over there. And that's why the Chinese people are trying to do the best for themselves. And they have a government that actually cares about their people. And their set goals is to lift people out of poverty. How I wish our government's set goals was to end poverty, to end starvation, to end food security, to give us health care. This ain't even nowhere in their law, in their goals. We got two idiots bragging about how they're going to attack people that ain't done shit to us. The Chinese are leading the way forward. I did a video called Country Music's Dream is Being Made a Reality by China. And what I meant with that is when country music took off in 1960s and 70s, when rural people were forced into cities and faced horrible conditions, and they were nostalgic for the country, living in the country life. But moving to the cities was actually a step forward. I mean, they had to. It was better economic interest to move to the city and get those wages. But there was horrible conditions. People glorified the country. They wish they could live back there with the material resources. Well, China has massive anti-poverty programs, and they're going back into the rural countryside and building up towns and making opportunities, bringing jobs to the people. And that is absolutely inspiring. When I took my tractor trailer and I went up and down the middle Mississippi, and I went through the heartland, I went down to these little towns, I saw boarded up windows, and I saw a gambling shop and a payday loan place that charges 200% interest. No businesses, no nothing. And there's drugs, and there's poverty, and there's criminalization. Yep. And we need to be reinvesting in our countryside and lifting rural people out of poverty. Just like China's doing, there's an inspiration to us.
Exactly. I think that was pretty much. I couldn't think of anything more at the time. I'd have to think about that. I forgot about that. Just for those kind of people who are tuning in, what we do every week is basically at the end of these shows, we ask 2 or 3 questions. One of us take a turn of asking something conservative or right wing a right-wing question or something that's anti-communist and that, and the other person's ability to answer it. So it's good. It's good training. It's good practical, because we are all coming up against that every day. When saying, "Oh, well, socialism doesn't work," etc., we can explain, use examples, etc. So it's good training for everybody as well. Just on that, before we finish up, we need critical thinking. Ask me about that minimum wages, please. Look, yes, Marxist Internet Archive. They do have that article there. I believe it's. I think it's called "Inflation and the Cause." And what I'll do, I'll print that off. And next week we'll do a next one. Well, maybe I'll ask Dust to put that as a link, or just put it as a title, so you can actually have a look. I think you can get it in PDF form as well. So yeah, I hope they try to address that if you want to look at it. So it's an old article, it goes back to say about 1960, I think, but it's still, the core of it's quite good. It's obviously stuff referring back to what was happening in 1960. It's not applicable today, but there's just the core of it still quite applicable.
I just want to read this comment right quick. It seemed interesting. Corporate media functions break non-owners' attention away from destroyed food, lack of clean drinking water, mass incarceration, proletarianization to break working families' will to control surplus value. And I mean that's exactly right. If you go over the interview I originally did with David Fox, it's a three-pronged: globalization, neoliberal austerity, and the technological revolution has resulted in hyper monopolization. And what started in Black and brown communities with getting rid of the people's jobs, putting out drugs and criminalizing community, is happening more and more in rural areas. There is more economic and material basis for solidarity of Black and white unite and fight against our common enemy of the capitalist imperialist more than ever, and not just in our own countries, but form a popular front with an emphasis on who we are and our culture and our roots and where we come from, a popular front against U.S. imperialism. Cut the strings of your community with the imperialists. Stop having Stockholm syndrome and allowing the people that are putting us down to tell us who to hate. Down with the imperialists, comrade. Any ending notes, comrade?
Oh, well, I think we've cut through a fair bit today, and I'm surprised that 80 minutes went very quick. I don't realise it when I'm talking, but time just goes really quick when we're going during these videos. But obviously, coming through that, it's going to be very interesting as things intensify here, especially for Australia. I mean, obviously, I think there's going to be a call by some sections of the ruling class to just calm it down. I believe there's been, well, looking at Global Times, Global Times, but other media sources as well. Not saying it will happen, but I think there's going to be some pressure just to calm things down a little bit, because I know full well the ruling class here, with the federal government on behalf of the ruling classes here, and on imperialism. The fact is, if it's going into a full-on fight with China, it's not going to win. In fact, they're going to lose out. I think some sections of the ruling class start to wake up, oh, we need to back off here, we're going to lose our markets. We'll just see how that pans out. Be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if there's more memes appear as well. With the Afghan war crimes, obviously there's been 13 soldiers called in at the moment, basically to show cause, want to put it that way. But obviously, there's a lot more that's going to be coming out of the woodwork. I believe there's more than 39 crimes being committed. I think there's been more atrocities that haven't been talked about yet, but more so will come out of the woodwork in the next couple of years. But I think what we've got to understand what war is all about is the continuation of politics by other means, and why we're in there in the first place. Now, I've heard people say, oh, it was about natural resources. Yes, but that was part of it. It was there to deliberately destabilise the whole region. As I said, you have China to the east of it, Iran to the west, Russia to the north. Perfect way to actually destabilize that region, and of course those three countries have got a lot of heartache and grief to deal with, and then spend a lot of their time and resources trying to deal with all the problems that come out of Afghanistan at the time, and also too for Pakistan to a certain degree, and no doubt India as well. So where it weren't, if it was there just primarily for all the resources, well, we would have seen all the drill rigs in there drilling away, putting the blast works in, setting off the depth charges to make up the open cut mines. You would have railways built, etc., and ports built specifically for the extraction of raw resources out of there.
All right, maybe we could try a new ending. I know we like to say "dare to struggle, dare to win," and I always say that's what you say, and I always say "all power to the people." What if we do those simultaneously? First one and then the other. So I'm gonna go 3, 2, 1, and we're gonna say "dare to struggle, dare to win." All power to the people. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All power to the people. All right, we'll get better next week. All right, good night, comrades.